One. Welcome back, guys. We got episode 5 here today, part 2 of the parent series, which is only going to be 2 parts. uh, so today, joining us is my dad. There's not really an introduction needed for how we met. I don't really remember it, but he does. I hope. And so my dad is, as a brief background, my dad is a principal architect at Strata, based out of Pittsburgh, but they've recently opened up offices in the last 2 3 years in Philadelphia and now in Raleigh, or they're at least getting that going, and maybe we'll touch on that a bit at some point. But if you've ever been in Pittsburgh, you've without a doubt seen at least a handful of my dad's buildings, and we don't really have to get into the specific ones. You can go to stratallc.com to check them out. But I hope he's here to talk. We talk about, life stuff. We talk about finances. We talk about, career, life, definitely a super supportive role, and very lucky to have him in my life. Very fortunate. So without further ado, the man, the myth, the legend, my dad.
Thanks, Clayton. Yeah, I'm glad there's only 2 episodes to this. Keeps your life simple. The mom and dad.
Yeah.
But no, but it's cool. I mean, they're my firm's buildings, I'll say. I mean, I have a hand in a lot of them, but we have a tremendous team that works together to deliver the architecture and the services we do. So that aside, it's really cool to be being interviewed by my own son. Something I never thought of as part of my future. So, I'm not nervous. I'm kind of excited.
Cool.
And interested to take this conversation wherever you want it to go. I have no problem speaking my mind and saying whatever I think. So
right.
Hopefully, and I know this is uncensored, right? So I can say anything.
Piss, shit, right. Fuck. We got them all.
Good.
Uncensored.
Not that I use those words all the time, but
I've never heard you say those, so that doesn't make sense. Let's start. I know one place I want to start. In this day and age, like, everyone's struggling for meaning, trying to figure out what they want, who they want to be, where they want to go. And I really love your story of whenever you were, I'm not sure if you were in middle school or high school, but they had you, I'll just introduce it and let you tell the story, but they had you do, and I know I did it, was like a test to tell you what you were going to do in your career. And I think it's a fantastic story, and I think it's, I'd love to hear it from your point of view.
Sure. Yeah, it was, the story starts much earlier. When I was in 6th grade, I went to a Catholic grade school, and they were building a brand new modern church right next to the playground. It was a folded plate, glass, concrete church that's still there today. And I was just fascinated by the construction process. So I spent a year of my recesses watching what was going on in the construction. And then partway through that, I was in one of my Cub Scout meetings, and the architect of the project came in and talked to us, to the Cub Scouts. And that was kind of fascinating. And I made the connection that the architect, really creates the building, designs it, and then follows it through construction. So at that point, I said, I'm going to be an architect. Of course, this was like about the 40th, career I'd picked for myself by 6th grade. I wanted to be an astronaut. I wanted to be a secret agent. I wanted to be all those cool things that are in movies and TV. But this stuck. It was like, that's what I want to do. So throughout middle school,
real quick, can I pause you off right there?
Sure.
Because I think this is actually a really important part of the story. First of all, I don't think I ever heard this part of it. I don't think I heard that throughout your entire, recess you were doing that. But I think what's huge, and especially the way I introduced it, is, we're all struggling to figure out what we want to do.
Right.
Are you able to describe that feeling you had when you were, I don't want to put too many words out there because there's a way I would describe it, but are you able to describe what the difference was between astronaut, cowboy, these movie ideas and being an architect?
Yeah, I think the earlier ones maybe were more ideas of ego and fun. And I think the creation of the building, I mean, actually and it was really the fascination with how they built the building. I mean, it was a very contemporary structure. It was a folded plate concrete roof in a fan shape. Took a lot of scaffolding and rebars. I mean, it was just like the seeing that complexity, I guess, in that, you know, and all those people working in kind of unison. It was just like I felt like, oh, you can create something, you know. And I think that's what turned it for me, because I'd always played with Lincoln Logs and erector sets growing up, building stuff. But it was just that idea of building something, I think, that kind of really hit me emotionally, that I want to do that. You know, I want to design buildings and see them built. Um, and that's as best as I can remember it. I could still remember being in the church room where we were meeting with the architect, and I could still see him standing there, and us looking at plans and a model at the church. So it's like kind of an image that's ingrained in my brain.
Yeah.
I remember being on the playground and watching construction and seeing the scaffolding and stuff, but those many days I did it, I don't think there's a lot of solid like memory, but
Right.
I just remember it all happening. So it's almost like there was that epiphany, I think, as a young kid.
Okay.
Um, and then, you know, so for them forward, I'd go to talk to my counselors at school, and they're like, well, you don't really know what you want to be yet, you know, and you should
Well,
take this.
was
And
that from the test? Was that from the test then?
well, no, that comes a little later.
Oh, okay.
So this was really a lifelong thing that was happening to me,
Oh, really?
because yeah, I mean, I was constantly being told that you don't know what you want. This is what you need to do if you want to do that, or you won't be able to accomplish that. It was really a lot of negative
Really?
feedback, but I was like, no, this is what I want. I mean, there was like no doubt in my mind. I didn't have any reservation. And then I had people
What,
telling me, well, you need to take drafting classes, you need to take math, you know.
no,
And that,
was an
yeah,
architect like some sort of, because like in my mind, the way I
yeah.
resemble it is like if you hear like of a rapper or someone is like, okay, you're not going to do that. You're never going to do that. Was it very, I mean, was being an architect, I mean, I know like the schooling was difficult, but was there like not a lot of
Hmm.
jobs? Like, was the job market bad or something? Like,
No,
why were people
I,
being so negative?
I think because they didn't understand the profession or what it was about. I mean,
Okay.
I really didn't understand it either at that time in my life. I didn't know what skills I needed to become an architect. As you know, my parents, your grandparents, my dad, you know, your grandfather, I think, dropped out of school at eighth grade due to the Depression, and worked in factories, and then went to the and served in World War II.
Right.
And my mom, your grandmother, went through high school, but that was all the further her education went. So there was not a great depth of knowledge about professions and education. But my parents were always like, get a good education, do well in school. They always drove that home. So I think it was, when I look back on it, I think it was lack of understanding of what the profession was and what you needed to do because it wasn't like your typical become an engineer or become an electrician or become, you know, most people in counseling, I think don't really understand the profession, what it
Okay.
takes. So that was part of it. Then in ninth grade, this is what you asked about. There was the Ohio Valley, I think it was called a career test or something like that. There was this test where you answered all these questions, and they were to be able to tell you exactly what you wanted to be in life or where your interests lie in terms of a career. And I took this test. I thought it was stupid, you know. And I went and had to meet with my counselor,
Yeah.
and he's like, "Oh well, you don't really know what you want to be yet." I said, "Yeah, I do. I want to be an architect." Well, no, you don't really know, you know, blah blah blah. You know, I said, "No, I want to be an." I kept saying, "No, I want to be an." It was kind of like they weren't listening to me. It was it was like I kept saying this over and over again,
Yeah.
and and it's kind of interesting. This maybe ties into that. I just had this epiphany. We'll talk about a little bit later about that dream I was telling you about that I had a
Oh,
lot of
right.
times as a kid. How that maybe
Well, and
relates to my mom too.
I had,
Yeah.
and maybe we just jump off on it right now because I had
Okay. Good.
those things have replicated in my life as well, and
Right. Right.
let's give the people some backstory on this.
Okay.
Gosh, this is crazy, right?
Yeah.
Well, maybe we'll start with you. Let's start
Well,
with you.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I had this recurring dream as a kid. Of course, I went to Catholic grade school. So you had nuns and priests and some lay people that taught. I was an altar boy, all that stuff. Well, I used to have this recurring dream as a kid that a nun and a priest would come into my bedroom at night, tie a string around my finger, and I would not be able to say anything. And they would stand there next to me at the door of my room, and listened to my parents talking in the other room. And I could hear my parents talking, but I could never say. It was like people couldn't hear me or listen to me. And and now when I just relayed that story, so that dream kept repeating, never understood it. But when I was just telling this story now, how nobody was listening to me, that I wanted to be an architect, I flashed back to when I was 4 years old. And I used to sit up close to the TV all the time. My mom kept saying, Alan, why are you so close to the TV? I said, well, I can't see. I can't see. And I said that for like a year. And so finally it dawned on her, she should take me to the eye doctor. and, so, and then the eye doctor is stunned. He's there, how did you know to bring him in? I'm like, well, I kept telling her I couldn't see. But, it was that time where you just didn't listen to the kid. She thought I was just being difficult. That I was basically communicating what the problem was, but nobody was listening. So that just flashed in my mind as I was telling you this story about,
Right.
they didn't want to believe I wanted to be an architect, as though I didn't know what I was saying. So,
right.
So
and
I'm sure.
Well, in my parallel, right, is whenever I was a kid, Mom, God bless her soul, I know she hates when I tell this story. So I'll have to ask you a portion of it, but I was a kid, probably 8 or 9 years old, would you say 10?
Mm-hmm.
And
Okay,
I was riding my bike down the hill. I make a quick turn, and my leg smashes into a bench that's just like in the ground. It completely just my leg between the bike and the bench just crushed. Maybe I'm over amplifying a little bit.
No, it was you somersaulted over the bike. I watched it happen.
Oh, really?
You literally, your shin hit the edge of the wood bench that was planted in the asphalt.
Yeah.
And you literally hit it, flipped over the handlebars and hit the ground. And we were like, oh my God, and then go ahead and tell that story. It was pretty dramatic. It was pretty scary.
See, I guess my mind must have suppressed some of that. But yeah, so then, so the next part is that for what I thought was like 3 or 4 days, I was limping, and my mom says that it was only a few hours, so I'll get the devil her due. Maybe she said it was a couple hours, but in my mind, it was 3 or 4 days. And then we're
a couple of days. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thanks for the verification. Love you, Mom. And so I'm playing with the Hunts who live behind us, and their mom's a nurse and or a doctor, I believe. And give her the respect.
She's a nurse.
She's a nurse. Okay. Yeah. She's a nurse. And, I'm like limping, and like at a point, I guess I stopped playing. Like I wasn't even playing with everybody. And she was like, Mom, like Miss Terry, Mom, why is he like not playing? And she's like, oh, well, he's been like limping, like da. Meanwhile, through this time, I'm like, Mom, I need to go to the hospital. Like, Mom, something's wrong with my leg. And it wasn't until these 3 days later, whenever the nurse told her, like, yeah, you need to take him to the hospital. Turns out I broke my leg. For Mom's sake, it was a buckle fracture, which,
right.
She's not here to defend herself, so I want to give her the benefit of the doubt. But it goes back to your point of like, not being heard. And, and even the crazier thing is that then there's a girl, Sophia, I'm dating now, who she told me that she had a dream. Like it was a couple nights before this. I forget the whole series of events, but she basically told me she had a dream where I was like either shot or stabbed in the stomach. And like, I kept asking like for help or that like to go to the hospital. And she said that like in the dream, she logically knew I needed help, but wasn't taking me to like, to the hospital. And she woke up feeling like super bad. And I was just like, yeah, that reminds me of this time with my mom.
I know, it's funny. I mean, I think, in defense of your mom, she's has such a huge heart. But she was raised to like, don't go to the doctor. There's no reason to go to the doctor. And that's like the mindset of her father, her mother. And I find it amazing because I went to the doctor all the time, whether it was in the emergency room getting stitches or going for a shot or a sinus infection. I mean, I was at the doctor a lot. And so I'm always like forcing her, well, she has things that come up, and she, you don't go to the doctor all the time. It's just not done. So it was kind of funny.
That's interesting.
I think, so, but it was like 3 days. I think it was like on a Thursday where you did the flip, you slept that night. And then Saturday I came home and you were down there sitting, and, Mrs. Hunt was saying, he needs to go to the hospital. I said, yeah, we're going right now. Actually went down to Children's. We spent the night at Children's.
Do you think there's something with like parents not listening to kids, or just they get fed up with their kids and then they're like at a certain point? Because I can't relate to this. I have no idea.
Yeah.
Is there a certain point?
I think so. I think as children, you're constantly kind of testing the boundaries. You're always asking for things over and over, whether you need them or not.
Okay.
And I think you probably build up this resistance to think, well, they're just saying that it's not real, you know. Um, but I think as parents, we need to be more observant because I think a lot of things kids are saying, they're saying them for a reason. You know, I mean, the child is fairly intelligent, although we don't
Right.
want to perceive them that way.
Right.
But they're communicating, and I think it's an embedded mindset that like wow, that's the other thing in Deb's life growing up. She was told children would be seen, not heard. Like you don't go into a living room full of adults and say anything if you're a child. That
Really.
was that Central PA Presbyterian upbringing. And I've heard that saying, children would be seen, not heard. So
Right.
there is this kind of conditioning of mindset that maybe makes people react that way. And it's very
Jeez.
frustrating for the child. So think about that. It's very,
Well, it just repeats
I've,
itself.
well, I've told you the story about Allie with the television, right? Have you heard that
Um,
story?
I
I
don't
was,
know.
well, I was with your sister, and this is one of those moments where you discover you're in a different generation. Because Allie was
Yeah.
in, you know this one,
Yeah, I did. But go ahead.
but
Yeah.
that's a good one. Because I tell people this and they just laugh. I mean, Allie was in there watching cartoons one morning. I'm in the kitchen making pancakes, and she's got the volume really high. I'm like, Allie, turn it down, turn it down. I'm like, and she's not doing it. I'm like, Allie, turn it down. So I go in the living room. It's like, Allison, I told you to turn it down. She's like, Dad, what does turn it mean? It appeared to me she had never used a knob to change the volume on a TV. It was a button. And I'm like, oh my gosh, Ellie, I said, I'm so sorry. I said, come in the kitchen. I said, see these knobs on the stove? I said, well, TVs used to have these, and we'd say turn it down meant to turn down the volume. It's like, oh my gosh. So communication changes over time. I mean, our whole
Right.
reference of what we're taught to know, it changes over time, and that's where I think we are today. I mean, technology has just like pushed this massive transformation of how we communicate. And I get the sense sometimes that, it's hard for different generations to really connect. Like I see that in young
Right.
people,
Right.
they want to text or email. They don't want to pick up a phone and actually use it for what a phone was designed for, which is to have
Right.
conversation. And so it's a whole different way of seeing the world and understanding it. And it's foreign to people of my age. I mean, we didn't have cell phones till 2000. I
Well,
was, I
and
was, 30, 48, 42 years old at that time.
and even
So,
and which is, even to your point, like I'm, millennial, 27, and I still have an
right.
issue. And, luckily with your help and mom's help, they've pointed out where, if it's a serious conversation or something, like if you're texting,
Yeah.
it's so worthless. Like you send these huge ass paragraphs to someone. It's like, you don't even read half of it. And it's like, you can't even pick up the
Yeah.
emotion in it. And it's just, to your point, it's like, that's something that I've had to get a lot better at. It's like, okay, if we're having a serious conversation, A, we should be on the phone talking, but B, and even better
Right.
is if we're FaceTiming or like actually looking at each
Right.
other to pick up verbal cues, to understand what they're saying, all these things.
Right.
And we want to solve these problems with texting or a quick tweet or, on these forums. And it's like, you can't
Right.
even communicate a fraction of the
Exactly.
information.
That's exactly correct. And we've had scientists telling us this decades ago. It's like, oh, that 80% of our communication is nonverbal. It's facial expression, it's
Right.
tone of voice, it's how you highlight words or emphasize words. It's a lot of things that are not just the words themselves, but how we deliver them, how we pause, how we look, how we react to
Right.
statements, and we're losing some of that with this masking too. I mean, you're not only does the sound get a little garbled, but you have no facial reference when you're talking to people.
Can't see if they're
And
smiling. Can't see if they're frowning.
yeah, exactly. Or what the word. A lot of times you see people mouthing words. You might not hear them, but you can understand it because of the shape of
Right.
what their mouth is doing. And people don't realize that that's part of how we communicate. So
Yeah.
it's
I
a
mean,
very difficult time.
yeah, I mean, it'll be definitely interesting to see how this kind of moves forward. Yeah, but even like to that point, if you're watching this on YouTube versus just listening to it
Right.
in your ear, this podcast, like it's going to change your perception of everything. Like whether it's just my
Right.
facial tone, whether it's my hand gestures, whether it's the background, it all kind of changes the
Exactly.
perception a little bit.
Right. That's exactly right. And I think we've found in our business practice, it's always better to get together and have a joint discussion. It's
Right.
so much richer, it's so much more informative, and
Right.
it's much more memorable as well, so that you're able to build relationship with people you're working with. And that's a key to having better communication as you go forward, you know.
And yeah, and let's touch on this a little bit more. Because something I'm thinking about is how you said like disconnection from other generations. Like
Right.
I think that to me is such a, because I'm in this pivotal point in my life, right? 27, you're not really a kid, but you're not really an adult. You're an adult, but you're not really like, you know,
Yeah. I know.
I still feel like I'm in this in between stage of like, older people will hear what I say, but not really take it into account. It's that seen, not be heard thing. Um,
Right.
but like, I'm obviously have enough experience to live on my own. Uh,
Right.
and to kind of get back to your communication thing, it's like, it's, and I kind of touched on this the episode with mom, is like I feel like there's this intrinsic knowledge in everybody, this intrinsic just wisdom and just understanding of reality. And the problem is that we kind of get shaped from a young child to, be in this box, do right things, do wrong things. And
Right.
especially as if you are the parent and you can't like verbally communicate it to the kid, it gets like disgruntled and anger gets involved. And then, you warp their reality.
Right.
Where am I going with this? Do you see some way of, now that you're, I guess, in
No.
the, on getting towards the older side of the spectrum, is there any way you're able to see, like, if we're able to kind of like take a step back and be like, look, they're human, even if it's a 3-year-old kid, a 3-month-old kid. I was just spending some time with my, buddy from college, his son, who's 3. And it's like, there's still communication there. It's not, he can't pick up a phone and text, but like, you can tell if he's hungry. You can figure it out if he wants to get up and move. You can figure like these things out. So, he's not going to solve, like, he's not going to put human species on the moon, but like, there's still wisdom within that child.
Yeah, I think there's a certain amount of behavior and understanding that's genetic. I mean, that's,
Right.
how animals know what to do to procreate, how to raise their offspring. I think the same is true with humans. There's a lot of genetic makeup of our brain and intelligence. And I think that gets programmed out of us by what we hear constantly from the time we're a child until we're an adult and forward.
Right.
Because when you think about the number of synapses that happen in the brain in a second, there's thousands and I think like 50,000 or something like that, and we become conditioned to respond to certain stimulus a certain way.
All
So
right.
every time we hear kids should be heard and not seen, or should be seen and not heard, should be seen and not heard, should be seen and not heard. So you walk in that room, you stop talking because you're not supposed to be heard.
Right.
So we do condition the behavior, and and it's true. The fascinating things is these last few generations, like the millennials, the Z's, all the different names, they've grown up in different technologically different times. Like
Sure.
the whole idea of who are the kids that grew up when the web, their entire life has had a website. That's something that didn't come into creation until I was in my mid 30s or whatever, late 30s. So how those imprints you're getting as a millennial are much, much different than what I got. So you get a combination of the old school, like kids are to be seen, not heard, and then you get the internet, which gives you the entire world of information.
Right.
So it's hard to navigate it because when you see the whole world, you're seeing the whole world of cultures too. So every culture has its own characteristics and
Right.
and kind of methodologies of how they live together as a community.
Well, and
So
just right,
it's
and
very
like
difficult. Very
the way
difficult.
their language is structured then shapes like the way
Hmm.
they say things, and certain words mean different things. And like, for
Hmm.
like a Portuguese reference, like, we very well casually say like, I don't care. Well,
Right.
care isn't used in that way. So to them, what you would have to say is the direct translation is it is not important. So like to say
Okay. Yeah.
like, if you're like telling me all this stuff and it's like, oh, it's all good, you can do that, I don't care, you're basically saying it's not important. Like what you're doing is not important. And so like you can't even have that like transition. So if you just say someone like off the cuff, like, oh, I don't care, it's like, in our
Yeah.
mind, it's just like, you can do what you want,
Yeah.
but to them, it's like, I'm not important to you.
Right. Yeah. And that is, I mean, it's about listening. And I tell this to people all the time. Words have meanings, and
Right.
sometimes those meanings for you and for me are different meanings. So
Right.
we might use the same word, but we intend something different. So I'm a big believer that words have a meaning, and you should use that meaning. But
Right.
then you have words that have multiple meanings. Like I remember an experience when I was I think it was in Southern California, and it was a hotel, and there was coffee, like coffee service out. And this young Mexican girl, she must have been 13. She didn't speak English too much, but she's looking, and she's like, well, she's like, is, because it said sugar, sugar free sweetener, so
Right.
she thought it meant that it was no charge. She's there, so is this free? Is this free? And I'm like, what do you mean? I'm like, yeah, it's all free. There's no, but what she was referring to is it said sugar free in one of the sweeteners or
Right.
something. So her perception of what that meant was totally different than what we've come to understand. When we hear sugar free, that means it has no glucose in it, it
It's
has no
without, yeah, it's
sugar.
without,
Yeah,
yeah.
without
Yeah.
sugar. It's not that there's no charge for it, but in this case, it was both. It was no charge for it, and it's without sugar. So I tried to explain that to
Oh
her best I
gosh.
could, and I think she finally got it. It was so, and every language has those things. I
Right.
mean, it's like, so how do you, so you can see how complex a simple thing like that can become. Imagine when you're talking
Right.
about philosophical issues or behavioral issues or
Right.
architecture, how do you clearly communicate the intent of your words, so people can grasp it in
And
their,
it feels like, right. And I mean, that seems like something that's just an ever ending struggle. Like, I,
right.
like, it's, especially as you see relationships like grow, whether it's,
Hmm.
maybe it's a little bit different with parents, but even just like friends
Yeah.
or, significant others, it seems like, I don't know if you're trying to find like a deeper meaning or a deeper connection, but there's like somewhere along the way, like communication starts like,
Yeah.
it seems like it's always changing per se, or you get interpreted one way but means something else. And
Right.
maybe you're a great person to talk to about this, because I know, I got a lot of my dry humor growing up from you, where
Right.
you deliver something funny in a serious tone, and it's supposed to be funny, but you come across as serious, or that gets the other person confused. um
Right. Yeah.
yeah, so I'm not
That's a
sure.
great. I'm
Yeah.
still fighting that problem. I agree with you. I told my HR director, I said, I'm going to be your biggest project, try to get me to, because I have this almost sarcastic, but I guess I don't know how to deliver it where people know that it's humor, so they take it
Right.
personally sometimes. So I feel like, boy, because that's part of who I am. It's part of what I like to, joke around with people. So
Right.
now if I do it in writing, I have to make sure I put the smiley face after it so they know I'm joking, or I have to be very careful the words I use so don't offend. And it's hard. I mean, it's because I spent 50 some years, but now communication has become so inseparable from, or maybe it's become separated from human behavior, that you're judged on, you know, almost the words that are used, not necessarily how it's delivered. And that's kind of that separation of going through text or email or something like that.
Right.
Because the way I read your message could be totally different than the way you would have said it.
Right.
So,
Well, and I think that's a huge issue we have with like kind of the huge
yeah,
media organizations. And I mean, part of their
right,
model is getting clicks, but it's like you could take a snippet from any little thing, and, just cast it in a light. I could be paraphrasing somebody else, but if you attribute it to me, now it's
right,
going to make me look bad. And you just read the headline. It's like Clayton says, I'm not sure if something I've said in this thing, but I'm sure I've already said something that you could easily take out of context and just
sure,
be like, and you just cast this whole story around it. And it's like, well, I didn't even listen to what he said. I just listened. And you can even do it with video clips too, which is the craziest part about it. I'm
right,
doing 2 hour long videos, and it's like, well, you could just cut like a 5 minute, even less, maybe a 2 minute, 2 second thing, and be like, well, here's why Clayton's a bad person. And it's like, well, you missed all the other context around it, the bigger picture,
right,
the whole thing that led up to this statement. And it's like, well, you're just gonna, chastise this person or this thing for this one moment, these 30 seconds that maybe are completely out of
Right.
context. And then the next level to that I'm realizing is there's a generational like situation around it too. And this is
Right.
what's so crazy about the whole cancel culture is that someone could have said something, 20 years ago and it's hilarious in the culture in the time period. But then you come
Right.
to present day where so many things have changed and it's like, okay, got to get rid of all of that. I mean, you see it happened to Dr. Seuss. It happened to, just, I don't really have the
Yeah.
list off the top of my head, but these, very, moving and important like documents in our history. And it's just like, nope, that was worthless. That was wasteless. Get rid of it. He's racist in today's society. Back then it was
Yeah.
like, okay, we understood the world differently. Humans completely understood the world in a different lens. And, I
Right.
mean, it's almost like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying. I mean, I think as a human race, we have to grow and get better, and I think we do. What was acceptable 2,000 years ago, maybe in Mayan cultures where they're sacrificing babies or people to please the gods, was very real, and it was the thing to do.
right,
We would never think of that today, but yet it happened. And then slavery is another thing. We thought it was okay to do that; it was right, but it was a horrible thing. But now we know it's kind of a growth or a growth of enlightenment and sensitivity to other people. And I think, today, I mean, I think the woke culture, it has its place because I think it's helping us become more aware of everybody that's out there that create
right,
the complete spectrum of our culture, all the people, all the different issues everybody deals with. But at the same time, you can't erase what happens in the past because I think if you do, you have no context for keeping the right path going forward. So I worry about that. I mean, there's a lot of
yeah,
people on all sides of that, but I learned from history. I mean, architecturally, I learned from history. Behaviorally, I think as a society, we learn from history the evil things that have
right.
happened in the past and are still happening today. So if you try to erase that, then it doesn't make it better now. It just makes it that may happen again more easily if we don't remember the horrors of the past. So
Well, and that leads to another issue where humans have extremely short memories. Like we
yeah.
forget all this stuff so quickly. And I remember I put a poll out on my Instagram one time, probably got like 20, 30 people. So insignificant,
Hmm.
sample size. But it was like, I remember I saw a picture on Instagram and it was something like it was something basically insinuating that these ancient cultures, such as Egyptians or Mayans, that
Yeah.
they were more intelligent than us. Whether they were listening to their internal self, if they were listening to, let's say, God more clearly, and God's kind
Hmm.
of a muddied word nowadays, but let's say spirit or the universe, and go listen
Right.
to episode 002 if you want to kind of get into that more deep. But it's like listening to your internal guide, and this is kind of something that we've worked on in the last. I'm in Orlando now, but when I was in Pittsburgh and we were hanging out for 3 weeks, um,
Yeah.
it's like, and this kind of comes back even earlier, is we all have this intrinsic intelligence just in us because we were born. The sheer fact that we're humans listening to this, there was like this intrinsic knowledge that was born into us, and it's almost like we're no longer communicating with it, that we've closed it off. And I forget how
Right.
I went down this wormhole, but it's hard for me
Well,
to go ahead.
yeah, I think what you're talking about is exactly what we were saying. I mean, we're conditioned to ignore what is innate within us. That's like little kids. Little kids don't see race or color. They
Right.
just see friends.
Right.
It's almost like, I mean, they have unconditional love as a little child.
Right.
And
Right.
then as they grow, that changes not because there's something wrong with them, it's something wrong with society around them that changes them. And I think that's what you're kind of talking about.
Right.
And we begin to accept these beliefs as if they're truths. And sometimes they're not. I mean, you look at the whole, like I always laugh at archaeologists because they always make all these assumptions and then it becomes dogma or fact. Now they're discovering, well, civilization didn't start 5,000 years ago. There's evidence there was sophisticated civilization 10,000 years ago and 15,000 years ago. And so
Right.
now it's like, okay, they got to rewrite the archaeological time frame. But So it's because there's the preponderance of evidence. I forget that one quote where, what is it? I can't remember it, but
You want me to
how,
look it up?
truth, well, it's the one about, first truths, or I forget who said, was that philosopher, that at first the truth is admonished and then it is viscerally opposed until it becomes, what we always understood. It goes from bad to worse, and then all of a sudden, oh, of course that's the truth. Now we know. So that's kind of what
All
happens.
okay. All truth passes through three stages.
Yeah, that's it.
First, it is
Yeah,
ridiculed. Second is violently opposed. Third is it accepted as being self-evident.
right, right. So that's kind of the way society is. I mean, and you can see it if you look back enough in the past, like 50 years, 60 years of my life. Those things happen all the time, on a grand scale, worldwide or throughout our country, and you can see the changing dynamic. And so you wonder, what is this? Why does it do that? Like, why can we not be in touch with our pure true self?
Right.
It's And I think we're not. I think as a society we're not. And I think it's just,
Well, right.
it's a really struggle. That's where we
And
struggle.
and here's maybe a manifestation of it that I think a lot of people can relate to, and I've helped you with, is just, and I've had this issue myself, is like overeating, or even at a
Right.
grand scale, over consuming, just in a general sense, over
Right.
consuming, having too many things, having too much food. It's at an intrinsic level, kids, like, and they've documented this in plenty of studies, where kids when they're born, and if they're hungry, you feed them. If they're not hungry, they don't eat. Like, you don't force anything on them. They will be extremely healthy individuals. They will be like fit. They'll be good. Everything will be fine. But you start getting these cultural stigmas, and I've been experiencing them a lot. It's, you look at it and it's like, well, you need to finish your meal. Or if there have been countless occasions where you and I have gone out to eat, and it's like, if I only
Yeah.
eat half my meal, I'm full. I listen to myself. I stop eating. There's, oh, did you not like it? It's like, what was wrong with it? It's like, no, I loved it. Like,
Yeah.
it's like,
Yeah.
no, I
It's
loved
like,
it. But
yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
Well, it's kind of funny. I mean, there's the book called The Pleasure Trap, and I forget the author, but he talks in there, at least maybe took this from one of his lectures I watched, but he says, there's over more than a million different mammals on the planet, more than a million, if you can imagine all these species of animals. But there's only three that have an obesity problem. Only three of
All
all
right.
those millions. It's humans, dogs, and cats. Okay, and we control the feeding of our dogs and cats.
Right.
And it's kind of fascinating because he talks about how when he would watch these like National Geographic shows with the lions, well, they're starving. If they don't get food, they're going to die. But he says that's all like our imposing our thought process on that. He says
We're
those animals
conditioning
eat.
lions.
Yeah, we're conditioning our mind about what
Oh,
they're
okay.
doing. But he
Yeah.
says these lions aren't starving; they're healthy. They eat when they need food. They rest when they need rest, and they procreate. So it's like they're following their genetic pattern, and all animals do that. Unless it's interrupted by
Right.
some, you know,
Well, and
catastrophic event. So
and what's even crazy about this is getting back to the 3-year-old, or 3-month, the 3-month old kid who I was hanging out with yesterday.
yeah,
I was talking to his parents, and they're like, yeah, I was like, as I was talking about this eating stuff, and I'm trying to like get this whole big picture about it,
right.
and they said that they were told by the doctor that you need to feed them every 2 hours. Every 2 hours you have to feed them. And I was just like, what do you mean? Like, they said that. They're like, yeah, like they said every 2 hours. If they're hungry, if they're not hungry, they should be fed every 2 hours to get them on a schedule, blah, 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 blah. And I'm just like, holy shit. Like, why do we not just think that this kid knows? Like, he'll start crying whenever he's hungry. Like, and
Yeah,
it's they even figured out a test. Like, they would poke his cheek, and if he would like move to the side and suck on the fingers super quick, it meant he was hungry.
right,
There's
right, right.
because they even pointed out, like, the second he was born, they put them up to the mom's chest, and he started just kind of going after it, like trying to suck. Like,
Yeah,
it's just this
right,
intrinsic knowledge. So it's like,
right.
even for at a 3-month-old level, they're being told, like, every 2 hours he has to eat, like, if he's not hungry, make him eat. It's like, why? It's
Well,
like,
I know. I mean, I'm no doctor, right? We did have three kids, my wife and I, your mom. And it's kind of fascinating when you were born, Clayton. It was kind of like, well, you'd get up, you'd cry in the middle of the night. And it was like, okay, we'd get up and we'd give you another bottle. And
Right.
we tried to have a schedule, but it was, and then the doctor said, well, if you're still hungry, add some oatmeal to the, I don't know if it was oatmeal or something to the milk to make it thicker. And so we started doing that and then feeding you at night. So here we were eating like probably 4 or 5 times a day. They weren't telling us to feed you every 2 hours. And you got chubby. I mean, you were pretty husky as a baby, because we were feeding you so much. And then when your brother and sister were born, the twins, it was kind of like two things we were doing with you. We would get up with you in the middle of the night if you cried, and we'd give you a bottle. And when the twins were born, doctor's like, no, his whole philosophy changed there. No, just let them cry. They'll put themselves back to sleep. You don't need to feed them at night. And I'm like, well, why didn't you tell us this last time? So it's kind of
Yeah.
like, so then they got used to sleeping through the night much quicker because we weren't like reinforcing this idea of waking up and eating. So you were kind of given that, constant food, like tell them to feed their child every 2 hours. I don't know where that comes from. I mean, I'd be afraid to do it, to my child. I mean, I think it's,
It's like we're
unless the
listening to the
idea is you give
kid.
them, yeah,
Maybe he
like
had a bad dream.
that's
Maybe
just
he's
it.
waking up because he had a bad dream and it just needs to be
Right,
like coddled, like,
right.
go back to bed,
Yeah,
you
and
know?
everybody thinks, well, he needs sugar or he needs a pacifier. Or we create all these things we think they need because we don't really know because we're not communicating, and we just need to look at what the child is trying to tell us.
It's
So
almost like we're not
those,
listening.
yeah, right. We're not. We stop listening as soon as they're born,
Right.
and we become immune to the signals they're giving us that would tell us what they need. I think, so
Or we
it's
were
kind of
conditioned
crazy.
out of them almost.
Right, right.
And this is what
Yeah.
kind of, yeah, and this is what kind of ties back to that, like, where they're more intelligent. That post I had, and it
Hmm.
was like overwhelming. People were like, no, we're the most intelligent civilization that's ever, the most intelligent humans ever. And it's like, so there's two things.
Yeah,
It's like, number one, why do you think that? And number two, it's like, how do you define intelligence? Because
yeah.
I would argue that in human nature, there's an insane amount of intelligence. I think I mentioned this on
Right,
a
right.
podcast earlier.
Yeah.
They like the Japan's, I love this, the Japan's subway system. They couldn't figure out how they wanted to redesign it, right? And
Hmm.
I'm sure as an architect, maybe you could relate to this. Like, if someone's like,
Yeah.
hey, we're going to completely redesign the entire subway system in Japan, like, how do we do that the most efficiently? It's like, well, as an architect, I'm sure you can figure out, like, how crazy
Right.
that conversation, that
Sure.
deliberation is going to be. Well, instead of leaving people to their own vices, because we all have egos, we have misprints, we're not perfect, what they did was
Right.
is they created a map of Japan, and based on population size, they would put food on each city based on like the population of it. So like the biggest would have been Tokyo, and then
Yeah.
obviously, hopefully Tokyo is the biggest. Someone fact check
Yeah, I
that,
think so.
but so they would put food on it according to size of city, and then they would let this fungus go onto the map and go and create food. And over like a 12-hour period, it
Right.
organized itself to distribute the food amongst it the most efficient way possible.
Right.
So they were like, oh shit, this is the most efficient way by nature for us to have a subway system. They created it, and now Japan has like the most efficient subway system in the world.
Right.
And it was by no doing of any human intelligence. So to kind of go full circle, it was nature, right? So,
Right.
the coming back to if we're the most intelligent, it's like, well, and this is kind of an epiphany I just had, is like, well, maybe we are and maybe we aren't. Like, we always
Right.
had the same intelligence that has been given to us over the last 20,000 years. I just think we're not listening to it. We're overpowering our analytical brain. And something I said on,
Yeah.
I think episode 2 was like, I'm starting to see it as, I think technology is our way trying to, manufacture our internal intelligence to
Hmm.
take over. You see it with like
Right.
trying to count calories. You see it in science when it's like, well, this is the way you do it. No, this is the way. And it's like, well, we're all different. So, it's like,
Right.
I guess that's kind of where I'm at
Yeah.
with that whole thing.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think sometimes we can conflict with what intelligence is versus knowledge because they're two different things.
Right.
The ability to, when you look at great minds like Einstein or people like that, um, they had a way of thinking about things that was outside what the convention is, and maybe it was closer to our true selves than the way most people think. We look at it as being different or more sophisticated, and obviously they're brilliant people, but perhaps they were more in tune also with their most basic self. That
Right.
allowed them to think without all those constraints created by the environment they grew up in. You know, and so maybe that's one of the secrets to that kind of intellectual growth. But yeah, it's I mean, yeah, they say there was, and it's very likely. I mean, in the Bekaa Valley, there's this monument where one of the big stones that's laid as the foundation is like 15,000 tons. It's like we have no equipment today that can move such a stone, but yet it's placed
Right.
in the foundation of this monument. I forget the name of it. Forget the name of the an ancient. They don't even know when it was placed. It's 10,000 years ago maybe. So somebody had to have the ability to do that. We can't figure it out today, so it just gets ignored. But there had to be an intelligence of people at that time that knew how to do that to make it happen.
Right.
So and it's like the what's the other? There's the other thing in eastern. Trying to think of the name of the find, but again, it's a place that was carved monumental stones. It was, now they were able to date it to 10,000 years ago,
Right.
long before we think, and it's happening all over the world. We're finding
I mean, a
massive
bit
amounts of
right. A
archaeology.
popular
Yeah,
example would be like Stonehenge. Like it's a pretty
yeah,
popular
yeah,
example.
yeah. I mean, they don't know how it was built. They know what it maybe looked like and the size of the stones are, and there's things like that all over the world. So
Yeah.
it's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, just
Yeah,
and then it goes back to intelligence. It's like, did they have
right.
computers? Probably not, but they didn't need
Yeah,
them because there was like a deeper intelligence that you didn't, I guess, need. It's like, you
right.
know, to think like a computer is different than to just be one with nature almost. It's like this like
Right.
divergent path almost that I think hopefully it'll like kind of intersect itself somewhere at the top, but um,
Hmm.
hopefully they converge at a certain point.
Right.
But this I think also leads credence, and so now that we're talking about technology and we're talking about
Right.
communication with like the younger generation, something that we maybe should touch on is cryptocurrency in general. Um,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
and I think this is an important segue because in my mind, like I don't know, I've kind of I'm not really sure where I land on this. Well,
Hmm.
I, I've gone back and forth on like what's going to happen in the future, let's say. But
Yeah.
I find it so fascinating where there's even a meme online. Like, so, and who doesn't know cryptocurrency? It's like blockchain technology. Maybe it's worth pausing this video and going to check it out. It could do
Yeah.
different things with the financial system. It can do different things with voting. Um, but
Right.
where it is, it's like the younger generation, the Gen Zs, the millennials, like I think that's mostly who's investing in this stuff. I can't say for sure. It's really
Hmm.
almost impossible to tell. Um,
Right.
but I hear a lot from the older generation, that it's fool's gold. It's this, it's that. It's not, it's not that it's not real, but it's not valuable. Like, those are dumb things to invest in. We were even at a dinner the other night and, it was just, I mean, everyone's got an opinion. It's very valid. There was the Warren Buffett. I even know he thinks it's insane. There's people that would never invest in it that I believe are older, over the age
Hmm.
of, let's say, 60. And there's even a meme on Reddit where it's like, it's kind of classified as like old white man yells about Bitcoin, and so it's
Yeah.
like anytime, and so it's like anytime someone over the age of like 60, bashes Bitcoin, they're like, you can,
Yeah.
it's weird because like I've done so much research that I can hear it in their voice and like the way they speak. I'm like, okay, you don't really
No.
get what you're saying. I was like, or you hear a politician say, we're going to regulate Bitcoin. It's like, okay, you really don't understand what you're saying. Like, so, when it comes to communication, it's like, being on this side of the
No.
spectrum, it's like, the older generation has majority of the wealth. Like that's just what's always going to happen. That's the way it's always going to be. It's like,
Yeah.
so,
Right.
in my eyes, it's like, part of me is selfish. I want to get all these old people into Bitcoin and then it'll inflate all my coin values. But it's like, I'm curious if you could kind of, because you're, I believe, on the end of the side. Well, how about you tell us? You tell us where you are, and then why you think there's like this separation in the generations with crypto.
Well, I think well, I've been struggling to learn what crypto is. You've helped me a lot, kind of exploring into it. I mean, part of it is understanding, like we talk about financial intellect or your ability to understand finance, and I
Literacy.
think, yeah, your financial literacy. That's the term. Um, I, I read this book when the market crashed in 2008, 2009. Our business, we lost 60% of our business within a month or months, couple months. So it was very devastating, very scary.
Right.
I learned a lot from that experience, but it was also very trying time. So a friend of mine gave me the book Web of Debt by Denise Brown, and it was kind of a fascinating study on currencies and how they work. And it was a historical as well as looking at the American currency, the U.S. dollar, and how it's used and its history. And I began to understand that currency today, like, it used to be backed by the gold standard, as they
Right.
called it. There were silver certificates backed by silver, and that was all changed. They no longer do that. Like around the turn of the century, the 1900s, they created the Federal Reserve Bank, which I find fascinating because it really is not a federal agency. It's actually the big banks that were anointed to print money for the government. Okay, our Constitution says that only the federal government can coin money. And keep in mind, when that was written, that's all there was coined money. There was no paper money.
Right.
So you had valuable coins, and only the government could coin money. So a bunch of smart bankers and politicians figured, well, we need to get control of printing of cash away from the government, put it in the hands of the banks. And that's really what happened. And then we got a constitutional amendment ratified through the states. Congress voted, signed in, and you got the Federal Reserve Bank was created. And once that was created, they then create money, like print the cash and loan it to our federal government. So now you understand why we have federal income tax. It was created in order to pay the interest on that money the government was borrowing from the banks.
Well, let's slow up. Let's slow up a little here. Are we able
Yeah.
to describe? Because I knew what you're saying, but it felt
Yeah.
like it happened real quick there, right? So,
Okay.
so essentially, in essence, what we have in this country, well, ipso facto the world, what we have in our monetary system, the way the U.S. dollars is created, right? It's like,
Right.
how can so the question becomes is like, you hear in the last, let's make it attach it to real, where we have all this
Yeah.
just extreme money being printed, let's say.
Right.
It's like something like a couple $1 trillion have been printed in the last 2 years.
Right.
The question becomes is like, where does that money come from? Or if you ask that question, where does that money come from? So to summarize what you're saying, and let me know if I've missed out any points, is, way back when, I think it was like in the early 1910s, they created, the bankers got together and said, let's get a hold of the monetary system of the United States. The United States, through lobbyists, through not understanding financial literacy, said, okay, sure, we can do that. That makes sense based on the way you're describing it. So they created what's called the Federal Reserve, but it's technically a private bank that then the U.S. government says, hey, we need $2 trillion. And the private bank says, okay, we'll print you $2 trillion. And then you owe us $2 trillion.
Plus interest.
Plus interest.
Yeah. So it's not a single bank, but it's a collection of the big banks. Okay. Like the Rockefellers, it was something that they attempted to do throughout history, like even during the Civil War. Lincoln went to the banks because they needed to borrow money for the war because he didn't know how he was going to fund the war because there was no income tax. And the bank said, okay, yeah, we'll loan you whatever you need. It's going to be 30% interest. And Lincoln's like, we can't pay 30% interest. So it was Treasury guy or whoever his financial advisor. And they said, well, we're the federal government. We can make our own money. We're allowed under the Constitution to coin money. So let's do it. And so then it became an issue. So then the banks began printing Confederate currency, and the Union was printing Union money. And at the end of the war, the banks did a run. They basically spread rumors that the Union dollar was going to devalue. And so there was a run on it, and they basically bought up all the Union money. and then were able to capitalize on the fact that they bought cheap and then could return it to its full value
Wow.
by loaning it out. So there was this big thrust. So it's and even before that in this book, it's kind of interesting because in Denise Brown's book, it's kind of fascinating how she chronicles this. It's very interesting. And I probably don't remember all the facts, but the bottom line was the banks have always been trying to get control of the monetary system because they know that's where all the power is. And so when that happened at the turn of the century, it seemed logical to everybody. Well, the banks are the people that control money, so we should let them print the money. What
Right.
could be more logical than that? But what people didn't understand is we're indebting the U.S. federal government to the banks, and that's why we have a debt. I mean, the reason we have a debt is because we borrow from the banks. Whereas if we were printing our own money and spending it for infrastructure or defense, there would be no debt, right? Because we just print the money we need to do it, and we'd do it, and it'd be done. And it's interesting when I've talked to various financial people. On one side of the spectrum is, oh, that's crazy, that's stupid, that's not true, and then other people is like, yeah, it's exactly what goes on. So
Really?
depending on who you talk to, oh yeah, I mean, within one company of my financial advisors, I get people with completely opposite opinions of whether that's real or not. You know what Denise Brown describes.
Wait. Okay, so this is pretty crazy. So within the financial community, they haven't
Yeah.
even determined that this is what actually happens or not. So this is still
Well,
like,
it's like a belief system. It's like when we were at dinner the other night and they can't comprehend the idea of blockchain. Like, why does that have any value in crypto, right?
right,
And we get inflation. Why? Because we print a lot of money. I mean, the whole idea of value is related to scarcity,
supply
not
demand,
abundance,
right?
right? Supply and
101.
demand. If you have a little bit of gold, it's worth a lot because it's a rare metal. It's
Yeah,
valued. So the less there is of it, the more valuable it is. Same with silver, platinum. Well, the dollar used to be backed by gold or silver, so there was a fixed amount.
right,
Um, and I think that's what I'm beginning to understand about blockchain is some of these cryptos, not all of them, but some of them have a fixed amount, okay, and it'll
right.
be released over time. And you can't screw with it like they can screw with the value of the dollar because the crypto is locked in this, the blockchain or the software that's
Algorithm.
mined all over. Yeah, so
Yeah.
you can't really influence or change its value arbitrarily. Um, and I think that's what's happened. I mean, if you look at the world today, I believe the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, would go around and help struggling countries that had financial problems, and they'd get them to tie their
Well,
finances to the U.S. dollar,
let's
right?
describe the IMF. I'm not
Yeah,
100%
the
certain what that
International
is.
Monetary Fund.
Yeah,
Yeah,
what is that? How is that
I
created?
um, I think it's an international organization. I probably don't know the history of it, but I
Okay.
know over time they've always gone into countries and helped them stabilize their currency or economy. And and then again, I took this from the book of Denise Brown. It's they would go in and if you have a disabled like where there's runaway inflation, things like that, said okay, well, let's tie your currency to the U.S. dollar, so its value is based on the U.S. dollar. So that'll give you stability because the U.S. dollar is kind of the gold standard in the world
Right.
because it's backed by the full faith and credit of the U.S. government. It's not backed by gold or silver, just the full faith and credit of the U.S. government. So,
Wait, so
right?
wait,
That's what your dollar.
so the US dollar is printed by central banks, but the
Right.
IMF is propping it up as, well, if you believe in the US government, then you should tie it to the US dollar.
Well, yeah, that's a way of stabilizing foreign currencies.
Okay.
If you're in a country where it costs $1,000 to buy a loaf of bread, that doesn't make sense because it just gets more and more expensive.
Right.
So the
Venezuela.
IMF would go in and tie these currencies to the U.S. dollar, and that brings more importance to the U.S. dollar worldwide because it becomes a benchmark of funds.
Right.
And I think the British pound is that way, and that's why they went back to the British pound. They were in the euro dollar and all that, and then Britain has broken away now from the euro dollar. So the British pound was always. I think they always kept the British pound, if I'm not mistaken.
I think the pound was
But
always there. Yeah, before that,
yeah,
like
so
when they left the
yeah,
EU, before they were in the EU,
yeah,
I don't think they ever went to the
right.
euro.
Right. So people don't understand. I think a lot of people are just not don't have that financial literacy to understand how fractional lending works, how banks make money on money. And I firmly believe we live in a debtor society where we're controlled because we have debt. I mean, I don't know if you remember
Right.
when you were graduating, or even when you were just enrolling at Central Florida. there are two or three banks there trying to get you to sign up for credit cards. Okay.
Oh
You're
yeah.
just starting your educational career. You're going to assume debt with your school loan, and they're trying to lend you credit right there without any
Yeah.
job or anything, right? So the idea is if you have debt, it kind of forces you to make decisions in order to pay
Right.
off that debt because you don't want to lose your car, lose your home, or whatever.
Well, now you're making decisions
Um,
out of fear.
exactly. You make decisions out of fear, and your decisions are predictable now because
Right.
if you don't do that, you're going to lose everything. And 90% of people don't want to do that. They don't want to lose everything. So
Now
they
you're
keep
attached to
working, paying
things.
the
Yeah.
debt, and you're attached to things, right?
Right.
So we live in a debt society. When you get rid of your debt, like I think you have much more freedom because your decisions are now based on what you want to do. It's not a fear of losing your house or losing your car
And I
because
think
you own them. You don't owe anybody anything.
right, and a perfect example to
Right.
that is I think my life where I'm at right now. I'm in Orlando. Like, I am debt free. I'm net positive on, net
Hmm.
worth. So it's like, that's a big thing when, especially when I was leaving San Diego. It's like, I
Right.
hear from a lot of people my age who I'm going to in Pittsburgh. And now again, I'm hearing it in Orlando, and God bless everyone who has said this. I'm just pointing it out that it's like, it's so great you're in a place in your life where you can do that. And it's kind of a weird thing for me to hear from people my own age. It's like,
Right.
well, you can do it too, kind of thing. And
Right.
but to not get too far off topic, but part of that is the idea of, well, I still have debt, or I still need to pay this. I still need to pay this. I mean, it comes back to
Right.
money. Money is a huge reason that people aren't living the life that they want to live or that they can see on the other side of it almost.
Right. Right. Yeah. A lot of it is driven by, and I guess it used to be easy to go bankrupt. Well, the bank stopped that. They changed the laws. So to
All
go through
right.
bankruptcy now is very difficult. Well, it used to
Really?
be you could run up debt, say, I'm going to declare personal bankruptcy. You're out. 5 years later, you're able to borrow again. Now
Really?
it's much more difficult to even declare because, it costs banks a lot of money.
Well, sure.
But it was a decision point. So now, even if you want to go bankrupt, it could be tough. You could be dogged by your debts for many years after, trying, if you stop working or can't afford to pay. So it's a part of the society we live in. And part of it too is our peer recognition. We don't want people to see us lose our home or lose our car, so there's that added psychological anxiety on top of the fact that you know, you lose everything,
And so this kind of can tie back into something I wanted to bring up with you. How fear
Mhm.
can motivate decisions and maybe you make the wrong decision. I remember
Right.
you were telling me maybe the year was 2000 ish, but you were telling,
Okay.
you had three kids at this point who were of the ages 5 to 6. Um,
Uh,
and maybe it wasn't this time frame, but you'll hear what I'm
okay.
saying. And you came to
Sure.
a decision in your life where you needed to decide between getting a job at CMU, Carnegie Mellon University,
Uh,
as like a
yeah.
architect of some sort or teaching architecture, or starting your own firm. Are you able to, I guess, at least tell us that
Yeah.
story and the whole thought process behind
Yeah.
it?
Well, it was even before I was married because I
Um,
was planning my future, and I was considering starting my own practice, and I was also interviewing
so
for a
what
job at
year,
Carnegie.
real quick, what year would this
This
have
would have
been?
been 90, might have been early 90s, like
I was born
92,
four.
93.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
it
I was
would have
born
been
four.
before. So that's right. I was married in 92. So this would have been like late 80s probably.
Okay,
Well, yeah, because 87, yeah, yeah, it would have been like 87, 88 that this
okay.
happened. Now that I think of the chronology, because I was actually working for public schools as an architect. And I was like, okay, I want to either go out on my own or there's also an opportunity to be a project manager at Carnegie Mellon. And it was alluring because if you go there, your kids could go to school free if they get accepted. It's a good job, solid pay, good benefits, all that stuff. And then
You were a CMU
uh,
alum.
I was an alum. Yeah, I knew the campus. I knew a lot of the people in facilities. I thought it'd be great, and I actually got offered the job, and then I thought about it, and it wasn't quite as much money as I was already making at the Board of Ed. And I just said, well, maybe this isn't the right move. I want to go out on my own. I'm gonna go out on my own, start my own practice, and so I did that. And then by time you and your brother and sister were like young teenagers, like 12 or 13, um, the entire facility staff at CMU was let go. They just did a big purge. They got rid of everybody, changed their whole dynamic. So And what I took from that was, wow, had I done that, had I taken that job there, I may have been part of that purge, and I would be, with
Right.
young teenage kids and without a job, without, college opportunity for them and stuff like that. So it was uh, kind of an interesting phenomenon, if you will. I mean, had I taken that job, my life may have been totally different. Who knows?
Right.
But it's just, you make decisions, you follow your gut sometimes, and I think again, it's that innate intelligence of what's best for you. You got to
Right.
follow.
Right. And so that's,
Yeah.
yeah, that's what I was kind of curious about is, on paper, right?
Yeah.
You'd be a CMU would be on your resume again. You would,
Hmm.
it would be very, distinguished position.
Right.
You would have had a stable
Right.
job. Cause I remember when you told me the story, it was like, well, I'm thinking about starting a family. Like, if I have kids, I
Right.
need to be in a stable position for them. They could go to college here. But then there was, and I feel like there's a similarity here between when you knew you wanted to be an architect, and when you knew that this wasn't the right job for you.
Hmm.
Did you kind of feel
Yeah.
that?
Yeah. Yeah. I did. I kind of remember that. I'm just not sure. There was an emotion tied to it, and I think, yeah, it's one of the things we talk about now. At least I talk about is you don't make big decisions when you're emotional. You have to be calm. You have to be relaxed, be rational. And it was just something struck me really wrong. Like this was not the right move. It's like no, go. I mean, it was alluring. That time making good money, good benefits, being on a campus. Was really
Right.
cool. But there was just something that was telling me no, that's not where you want to be. And so I started my own practice, and it was tough. I mean, I nearly went bankrupt the first year. I mean, I borrowed a lot of money on my credit cards to make the business work. I was looking for jobs because I didn't really have a client base per se. I was just out there striking on my own trying to get design work. So it was very difficult at first.
A lot of years
And
grinding.
yeah, yeah. And my first employee I hired was probably in the fall. I forget what year it was. Might have been '87. Um, he worked for me for about 4 months. Christmas time came. I had no more work. I said, I got to lay you off. Sorry, there's nothing I can do. And then a couple months later, I got busy. I hired him back because the market was tough then. He worked for me for a couple of years and then moved. But it's kind of like that's all learning experience. It's all
Right.
it makes you stronger, makes you think about things that are important.
It
So
puts
it was
more
good.
things
But
in perspective.
right, right. So I made the right decision. I think not taking the PM job and following what I wanted to do, which was to be an architect and build buildings, because that was my greater passion. I think, as
Yeah.
opposed
And
to yeah.
right. And so do you feel like, I mean, were there any things? I guess there's a couple things that I'm thinking of, but I'll ask it more generic because I
Hmm.
know because with this, you're starting your own firm, and being an architect and starting an architect firm, like being an architect's hard on its own, but to start your own
Right,
firm as an architect seems like it would be one of the most difficult, one of the more at least most more difficult things to do. Um,
right.
and then episode one, we had a huge conversation with Kevin Love about being an entrepreneur and those
Hmm.
things. So I
Yeah.
guess if anyone's listened to now, let's say your audience, you're speaking to people who have listened to episode one and now
But
this
one. Right.
episode. Um, is
Yeah.
there anything you want to highlight from his episode? Because I know you've listened to it. Um,
Yeah. I think it's fascinating. I mean, it was great listening to him. He understands the timeline of starting a business. And I think the things he talked about, like the 7 year investment. And I tell people, I have been telling people this for years. I said, you need to be in that business for at least 5 years before you know you're going to be able to maintain it. I mean, it seems like a gargantuan amount of time,
right.
but that 5 year mark, there's something intrinsic about that. I don't know what it is. But if you're able to sustain yourself and stay in business for 5 years, then things start to change. Now, could it happen faster than that? Possibly, but and like I loved his examples of the Gates and the wealthy tech giants and Apple Computer. And you look back at the documentaries of them and how they started in a garage, trudging it out, trying to sell their product on a piecemeal basis to get acceptance. We don't think about all that went into it at that time.
Right.
And he's very right. I mean, there was a lot of hard work, a lot of sacrifice, a lot of suffering. And I look what I went through for 5, 10 years to get my business going initially. And then you're constantly tested too. I mean, you have to reinvent. I had partners throughout my career. I had a partner. I dissolved that partnership. I was in business for myself. And then I formed another partnership with three more architects. So it was very volatile in terms of how things happened, but I kind of was following what I felt would be the best path, and it turned out to be that. I mean, I couldn't be more happy with where I am now and with the firm I'm,
Right.
part of. It's just phenomenal.
And you think it's like
Uh,
not possible without going through all that stuff where it's almost like,
yeah, I really liked what he said. It's like you talked about this, which is really important. It's about the journey. It's
yeah,
not about the end point. Like I'm not at the end point, and I think that's what I've been struggling with. Like, what is retirement all about? Like what am I going to do? Am I going to just go to the shooting range once a week, or go get my knees fixed, go golfing? I mean,
right,
that's fun, that's entertainment, but it's not I mean, I don't have that passion there.
right,
And really it made me realize, listening to that tape, that what has like motivated me all this time is the journey of building the firm, of the journey of doing architecture, and building houses, and seeing young architects have fun and grow as professionals. I mean,
right,
there's so many things that are joyful about what I do that aren't even related to the actual building. It's related to, the people I've met, the young architects and designers, and their passion and creativity, and seeing them happy at what they're doing, or seeing other people's careers take off that worked with me over time. There's all those other things you don't think of as part of the business, but are just as gratifying or rewarding. And so, but it's the journey, and I think that's why some people never retire, because getting to the end, I don't think, is the issue.
right.
It's enjoying what you're doing, and I guess that's what drives entrepreneurs. I mean, you look at these
Well,
entrepreneurs that are
yeah,
worth billions, they're still trying new stuff. They're still pushing the envelope. Like,
right.
was it B, or who was it? The guy with SpaceX. He's got this laser windshield wiper that you won't have wiper blades anymore. Laser will
Yeah,
remove the water and dirt. It's like,
yeah,
okay, so why is he even going there, right? He's going to the
right.
moon. He's going to Mars. He's got electric cars that are selling all over the place. So why is that? It's because it's the journey. We're driven by the journey,
Just that
not the
process.
end.
Yeah, it's that
Yeah,
process that you
yeah,
enjoy. and that's
exactly.
and that's something that, even with like this podcast, for instance, is something I'm trying to like really force myself to acknowledge. Is it's like, they give you like the numbers and stats and download numbers, and it's like, if I want all of them to already have 500 downloads, and it's like, dude, like it's like I have to step back and be like, no, like, my first episode I think had like 60 or 70 downloads, and it's like I need to take a step back. And this was in like, what would this been, after
Yeah.
2-3 weeks, and it's like I need to step back and be like, how like grateful and amazing is it that I, first of all, just, there's 60 people in my circle who are willing to take 11 minutes out of their day to just say, okay, I'll
Hmm.
see what Clayton's doing now. Like, as
Right.
opposed to just this, like, well, if it's 100, like if I already had 100,000 downloads, it's like, well, did you really do anything to kind of deserve that almost? And maybe that's
Right.
a negative way to look at it, but it's like,
No.
what needs to be done to kind of get you there, and like just being okay with that flow and process of it all.
Right. Yeah, because I think the pleasure comes from the achievement. It's not. I mean, and I think Love's comment about the kids were born into a lot of wealth, and they could just produce what they wanted. Dad cut a check, and then
Instantaneously.
and
Yeah.
then they're a pop star, or they're got a big web following, but there's no happiness, there's no gratification, because there was no effort put into creating it.
Yeah.
So they're not in tune with what they've done. They're not driven by a passion, or they haven't experienced the journey that makes it. Well, I mean, I think it's kind of interesting. Before I had kids, and people would you know talk about, oh, my little baby. They're all like, I was like, that's really weird. Why would you act like that? Then when you have your
Wait,
own
what are you
kids, you
saying?
understand,
Sorry.
like their love. They would emote their love for their children. You
Okay.
probably saw this with your friend, right?
Yeah.
And as a young 20-year-old, I'm like, it was a little bit corny to me. I thought, well, and then once you have a child, when you go through that process, transforms you. I mean, you have that like innate, undying love for your children, and maybe it's genetic, maybe it's a lot of things, but It's all about that journey. And I think the journey of you and your brother and sister growing up was a fun journey for my mom, for your mom and me. I mean, and we fret and we worried and we want to make sure you're doing good things and being good
Right.
kids and blah blah blah. And it's the journey. It's like, and now the fruit of that journey has been our relationships with all three of you as adults, and it continues to grow. And so
Right.
it's very joyful. The times we spend together to me are very joyful, and it's like, so it's wonderful. And I think that's true with your business. Like you see really successful people, they always have a very difficult start. You can look at newscasters like radio people like Rush Limbaugh or Dan Bongino. The things they've gone through to get where they are not simple, and they were very challenging. But they did it out of the passion for the journey and the passion of the quest they were on. And I think that's where the satisfaction comes. It's not the dollars so much.
Right. I'd like to
You
point
know?
out you just related your kids to your business, but
Yeah.
we can move past it.
Okay. All right.
No, I'll just mess with you. No, it makes complete sense, right? It's like
Yeah.
it's that process of continuously growing, and you could
Yeah.
just watch one episode of Shark Tank. You have this intro, and everybody, their net worth is over a couple $100 million, which is enough money for anybody to live on for the rest of
Yeah.
their life. Yet it's not. It's like it's not about the fact that they have the money. It's about that next dollar. It's about that next
Right.
person.
Right. Right.
And I remember reading, I don't know, some influential person or entrepreneur posted on Instagram, and it's like the most exciting time in a business is when you're at zero. It's like,
Yeah.
it's that mindset. It's that mindset that it's like,
Right.
that's the best point. It's not once you have everything and you're at $1 million or $1 billion valuation. It's like, no, it's that process of how do you get there almost. It's
Right.
like, okay,
Right.
where do you start? You have zero. Where do you go from here?
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I guess I hear what you're saying about me bringing my kids into my business, but I was trying, and this is part of my problem. I talk faster than I think sometimes. I was trying to draw the analogy that journey was important too. So we have these personal journeys that are just as important as our professional
Oh,
journey, if you
right.
will.
Right.
So that's the point I was trying to make, and probably did a lousy job
No,
of it. But
I could save you. I'll save you here a little bit. I mean,
thanks.
I'm seeing this in my relationship with my girlfriend, where it's like
Yeah.
I have a lot of what you're talking about, where it's like
Yeah.
part of you just wants to be like at the end almost. You like almost already
Yeah.
just want to be, and I don't, it
Hmm.
might start sounding a little weird because it's like, another person's involved with it, but it's like you almost want you're not falling in love with the journey. It's not like, okay, well,
Right.
here's where we're at. Like, how do we take this next step? It's just like, why are we not already there? And it's like, there's
Yeah.
even just saying that out loud, I can feel just like this incongruency within myself. Like
Right.
being just focused on that one next step, like how do you lift your foot for that next step? It just resonates so much
Yeah.
more than just, well, why aren't we at that end point? And it's like, well, what are you going to do once you're at that end point? Like, where do you go from there? It's like, you just
Well,
gonna go ahead?
you point out the problem with society. We're conditioning ourselves to get to the end point.
Right.
I mean, every successful pro, well, look how rich they are. He just created this little computer and he's a
Right.
trillionaire, or it's the idea of instant satisfaction, and nobody's happy. They're getting that instant satisfaction and they're not happy because they haven't really experienced the journey to develop that. So again, the relationship with Sophia or whoever, it's about that journey. It's about getting to know each other and challenging each other and going through those tough times and good times. I mean, that makes the relationship so rich, and it really binds you together, in ways that you can't do overnight. I mean, it takes
Right.
time. And I've always said, you have to really be with someone for a couple of years before you really know them well, because we set up ways of projecting who we want to be, and it may not be quite who we are. So it takes a lot of dialogue, and it takes part of that journey to discover each other. But the intuition is there that this is maybe the right person or the right partner, and so that journey now is what you have to go through,
And
and you can't rush it.
yeah, and certainly a part of that, like what you're saying is when we have, or whenever conversations are had that are deep or that are significant, like there's elements of myself that I also realize, like, you do
Right.
these, quick reaction things, or you say something and like it gets interpreted one way, but you're like, holy shit, like, it's completely valid the way you're interpreting it, but I meant
Right.
something completely different. And it's like,
Interesting.
yeah, and it's like this, like, it's a very interesting thing, and it's like, well, like, my bad. But let's get to a deeper reason of why I said this thing in the middle of this. It kind of creates this, like, almost like this wormhole, or this, like, the Alice in Wonderland effect, where it's like, okay, we're going to talk about this very surface level thing, but you hit a snag or a root or something, and it causes like this down. I don't want to call it like a downward spiral, but it causes like this, like,
Tension.
tension. Yeah, it causes
Yeah.
tension, and it's like, okay, I can feel like I said something that I wasn't, like, not that I wasn't supposed to say, but I didn't mean for you to interpret it how I said it. And
Right.
this,
Okay.
does
Okay.
it kind of make sense?
Yeah.
And then you
Yeah.
go down this
Well,
whole,
it's communication, right? I mean,
right,
I applied to your words what it meant to me, and not what it meant to you.
right.
So
Because then you go
I
down this
mean,
whole
this. Yeah.
wormhole of like, well, I said this because I meant this, or, and it's like, well,
Right.
what's your interpretation of that? And then you can very quickly like lose yourself down a, well, we were just talking about what we wanted for breakfast in the morning, but now we're
Yeah.
talking about why you project all these insecurities onto me. It's like,
Right. Right.
it's
And how's
it's
quantum physics
difficult.
affected my life?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So
I swear it's my parents' fault. Like,
yeah, absolutely.
yeah. But it's, and it's, so it's, to
Uh,
your point, I mean, 3 months, or 3 years, it's like, yeah, it takes time for you to, and it's not even just, right, you knowing them, it's like getting to know yourself well enough to be like, okay,
right.
well, is this what I really want? Like, is that really what I'm
Yeah.
looking for in a relationship? Is that really what this is? Because, like,
Yeah.
you have these conversations, it's like, well, if this is what you're looking for, I'm not that. And it's like, well, I never even said that that was what I was looking for. Yeah, I don't want to get this into a whole
Yeah.
therapy
Right.
session,
Right.
but the whole point
Yeah.
is just that snake, and it's like, you kind of just, it's that rabbit hole of just, one little thing, it's like, well, that's not what I meant, or communication. And then the issue for a lot of us is whenever it's like just over text, and then you need to be
Yeah.
secure enough to be able to even just have these conversations in person, which I think hurts a lot of
Right.
creates a lot of issues, fragments. You can't even text about this
Right.
kind of things.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And I think just grasp for a minute the complexity of all that.
Right,
You're fighting against these thousands of things you've been conditioned to react to in a certain way or to believe. You're trying to discover your true self, and like what makes you happy. You're trying to shed those preconceived ideas that you've lived by. You're trying to engage in a relationship with somebody who you know very little about, but you're very fascinated with. So imagine how complex that is. To try and sort through that. It is not a simple task. And there's not always a lot of clarity because of our own language barriers or how we perceive what we say and think. And so that's why there's got to be that constant. Well, what do you mean by that, or what are you saying, or
right,
how does that make you feel? It's like it's kind of this. It's tough. It's not easy. Um,
right. I mean,
so
it makes it scary too. You
yeah,
you
yeah,
know you don't want to confront those things, because then it really forces you to be
yeah.
honest with yourself, and then
Right.
furthermore honest with another person, which some of
About
us,
yourself. Yeah,
yeah, and some of us can't even be honest with ourselves, let alone be honest with another person.
yeah.
I mean,
So
that's
I think, when you reach that point, though, then I think, the connectivity is much stronger. When both of you can be your true self with each other and you find happiness, then, you know,
right.
that to me would probably be the ultimate experience.
Yeah, that's whenever it all
Yeah,
fully aligns. And yeah,
right,
but I mean, again, here's the thing: is like, as we have that conversation, it's a process, right?
right.
Like, be in that connective
Yeah.
state, and it's like, well, are you ever? And here's where it might get a little too deep. It's like, well, are you ever technically in that connected state? Because wouldn't you? Don't you always kind of want more? You always want a little bit more. You always want to be a little bit more connected. You always want to be a little bit more this. So it's like, there's an element
Well,
of. Go ahead.
I was going to say, well, is it wanting a little more, or is it being more connect? I mean, it's not a matter of wanting more. I think the journey is so you love the journey so much that you want more of the journey. It's like
Right.
if you're, it's you got. I'm always trying to separate what I see in movies, because they create all these. Oh, this is how it happens, and I don't think that's real. It's all
Right.
fantasy.
Right.
I think this idea that it's a lifelong journey of learning about each other and reaching that level of true self, true love for each other in a relationship. And so, is there ever a limit? Do you ever, it's like the end isn't really important. This goes back to my idea of journey. The end is not important. It's the journey. So
Right.
as long as you're on that journey and always working on that journey, there's always things to make you happy and to challenge your beliefs and bring you closer together. So I don't know. I don't know if you should be at the end ever. I don't know. I don't know.
Right. How do you
It's
kind
a,
of
it's a
define the end? Right.
yeah. It's like me thinking about retirement. Like, what is that? I just don't get it. I mean, I know I'm supposed to retire at a certain
Right.
age, but it's like, but I love what I'm doing. So so it's like okay, but
Well, I
uh,
mean, that's a good
I don't
point,
know.
right? Is like
I don't
that's a
know.
cultural
Yeah.
stigma on when you should
Right.
retire. And at the end of the day, it's like,
Yeah.
well, if you're just going to be sitting at home and not happy, then yeah. And
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know the answer. I guess I'm just putting that out there for you to think about. It's like,
Right.
it's like, do you want to start a different business? Like, do you want to, do you want to keep
Yeah.
doing that? It's like, it becomes a interesting thing. And I think that's something that I tripped that wire maybe a year ago, where it's like, what is retirement? Like, what do you mean you're
Yeah.
at the end? It's like, are you
Yeah.
like, I mean, what I think it means is society has deemed you old enough that we no longer need to use you for monetary purposes, kind of like the Matrix, It's like, all
Yeah.
right, well, like you were plugged in for 40 years and we got everything out, we squeezed everything out of you we needed. So we'll just let you wither for the last
Yeah. It's
20.
like go away. Go away.
Yeah. Turn off. No, don't think about
Yeah.
this.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, do we let our career become our identity as opposed to being ourselves? And
That's
that's
another big thing.
yeah. So I mean, it's I don't want. I mean, I'm proud of the business I have and the people that helped me create it, and they had a big part. It wasn't me alone, obviously, but I don't want to. That's not just me. It's everybody. So I don't see it as my identity. I don't see Strata as my identity. I see it as like a love affair of my business and all the joy that it brings me with the people and the interaction and the successes we have and the beautiful things we create. It's like I guess part of it is like you want to leave something behind. And maybe that's part of that genetic makeup is you need
Right.
to leave something behind when you're gone. So um, and I guess maybe I feel that way about buildings. They're there for the long haul, so
Well, that
they're
makes sense. I
memorable.
mean, there's
Yeah,
definitely
yeah,
a maybe it's a masculine component, or like I'm not really sure
yeah,
what it is, but like if you donate X
yeah.
dollars to a college, it's like, I want you guys to build a building in my name. It's like, that's why you go to all
Right,
these campuses and there's
right.
XYZ building. It's this hall.
Yeah,
It's like,
right.
there's, and I don't know. And this is where then it starts leading into the idea of the patriarchy, but that's a
Yeah,
interesting. I think that, well,
other.
let's not
Yeah.
go down that rabbit hole.
I
We don't have anyone.
agree.
I'll have that conversation with a girl. I don't. Two white men shouldn't be having that conversation
That's
in
probably a
this
good
age.
point. Good
Yeah,
point.
but to get back to the meta conversation, it's like, well, there is like a desire to leave your name on society, right? It's like,
Hmm.
I think
Yeah.
that I don't really like this quote, because I think it's a Japanese quote, but I don't really like it.
Hmm.
It comes across egotistical. It's like you have two deaths. It's like whenever you die, and then when the last. It's like whenever you physically die, and then whenever the last time your name is said, and
Uh,
and I
uh,
feel like that like leaves like a egotistical like embellishment almost on you
hmm.
know on it, but there's some truth to it, right? Because we do
Sure.
have these structures, we have these buildings, and there's no shortage of them, where it's like,
Hmm.
this is the Quteri Center, or this is the Alan Quteri blah blah blah, or this is, what I mean,
Right.
the Clay Quteri
Sure.
this.
Hmm. Yeah, and it's kind of interesting because the people whose names a lot of times appear on these buildings are politicians, who didn't really
Right.
create them. They didn't generate the money to make them. They just took our tax dollars and donated it,
Yeah.
and then they get their name on it. But then you have the titans of industry who create buildings and put their name on it. They've put in the journey or the equity to
Right.
make that happen, as opposed to somebody just parlaying taxes and getting their name on a building. So
Yeah.
it's a much
That's
different. So it kind of like when you look on the scales, one is real and one is kind of fictitious,
well,
if you will.
yeah. Well, that's a good
Yeah.
point. Maybe that's also a good like kind of separation because I know I was with mom and we were walking at the zoo and they're like putting in a new exhibit and like on the exhibit it said like courtesy of and it had like the big donor and then it like had like the mayor and like the politicians and it's like what did you sign a bill that said okay you can build here like is that your contribution and you get your name on this like
I know. It's like every groundbreaking's that way. All these politicians come out you've never talked to, have had nothing to do with the job, but they're out there getting their picture taken with the building.
I mean
It's kind of the world we live in.
well, and that's what's
It's like,
crazy is like I think whenever like Trump got voted in, it's like everyone's like, oh, it's just a celebrity contest, and it's like, there's probably
everything is.
probably some truth to that. Like,
That's right.
it's
Right.
just who you know to do one thing, and it's like it comes back to the idea in my mind that I don't believe like one person
Yeah.
can't. One person can change the world, but it like kind of takes all of us to kind of save it or to like preserve
Hmm.
it almost.
Yeah.
And so that could actually lead us down to another rabbit hole. Well, let's talk about it. One of the cryptocurrencies is Algorand, and
Hmm.
I don't want to get down. That's going to be a tough conversation to have. Let's not go down that hole.
Okay. Yeah.
Let's go back.
Leave algo.
But if I'm thinking about crypto, let's kind of go back to that
Sure.
conversation.
Yeah.
And I still, and maybe I still think there's something here with like, why is it that your generation doesn't really grasp the value of it? And I think this happens with older generations whenever the new generations come up. So let's start with
Well,
yours.
yeah. I think the bottom line is, you're a generation that's grown up with the website and technology. Ours has not.
Right.
There are people in my generation that are very knowledgeable of it, and they're probably more capable of understanding the nuances of what crypto is and how it works. But I think the point we were getting to before when we were having the discussion about the monetary system is, you know, it's about rarity. I mean, value is derived from supply and demand.
Right.
There's value if there's not a lot of something and people want it, right?
Right.
So crypto is by the way it's made. Most of them are made, but there's only going to be so many of them. Like they can't go out and print another trillion
Right.
of them.
Right.
So and I don't know because I know some cryptos don't have a limit, but like Bitcoin, I think has a limit,
Right.
right? There's
Correct.
going to be X number of Bitcoin, and that's it. So once it becomes something that can be traded for goods or services, then it has value. And because it's limited in quantity, the value can continue to rise at some. Now they say, yeah, it's been very volatile, but I think our cash, U.S. dollar, would be very volatile, except there's a lot of controls on it. I mean, we don't really
Right.
live in a capitalist society. Everybody thinks we're a capitalist society. No, we're not. We're like a pseudo socialist society because we have people changing interest rates. We have people controlling the money supply. We have people controlling the cost of goods and services. We have them supporting the cost of producing things. All of those affect the value of the dollar and our individual wealth. And people say, well, you need that to make things stable. But I'm not sure that's true. I think we do that
Well,
so
here's a
we can
question.
control our wealth.
Here's a question: is even if it
Yeah.
is you have quote unquote you have to do that to make it stable, even if that's true, let's just take that as a
Right.
truth.
Yeah.
Does it need to be stable? Isn't it better to have this volatile, uncertain? I mean, maybe, maybe not, but isn't like
Yeah.
uncertainty almost better for growth and like because change is inevitable?
Well,
But is this just like us
right.
trying to human our way into controlling one more thing of reality?
Right. Well, I don't know the answer to that. And I think that's what crypto, I think, is going to tell us because we're so conditioned to wanting to control everything
Right.
that when things are controlled, we're much more comfortable with them. When I can expect a certain amount of return on an investment, that's comforting because there's less risk if it works out, right? So
Right.
With crypto, I mean, the numbers fluctuate, but some of those numbers fluctuate, I think, because of outside things
Sure.
happening. Like,
Sure. It's a
you
small
know,
market. It's still a small market
right?
cap,
It's a
like for
small
sure.
market, and when you have Tesla come out and say we're gonna take crypto,
100%.
we're gonna take Bitcoin for our car,
100%.
that creates a big demand. Like, oh, the value of this has just changed.
Right.
And then he changes his mind, the value changes again. So the volatility wasn't because of the element; it was because of the market forces that
Right.
were trying to
For sure.
change it.
Outside
So,
influence.
right, outside influencers. And I think crypto, though, other than public opinion and the savviness of those investing in it, I don't think it can be affected as much by governments. I don't, like the
Oh
dollar,
no.
you can say we're going to print more. We're going to make. They can't go and make more Bitcoin.
Right.
So it kind of takes away some of that, control or I don't want to say control. It takes away some of that
Human
ability to
influence
influence. Yeah, to influence the value of Bitcoin.
to manipulate
Same
it.
with so to manipulate it. Yeah. So I think Bitcoin is going to be an interesting element. And I like that there's two countries that have already adopted it
I think it's
as a form
crazy.
of currency. So it will be very interesting to see how it evolves.
I mean,
It'll be interesting to see how people try to deal with it. Governments. So
yeah, and to get back, I think a parallel I kind of saw in something you were talking about was like that, and this is kind of a theme I think of our whole conversation, right? Is like, do we really want it to be stable, right? The aspect of controlling things, right? And if you bring this back to like a relationship level, it's like you can't have the highs without the lows, right? You can't
right,
have the acknowledgement of this person. Like if everything is so consistent and stable and just like this is it, you kind of take away the euphoria or the magic of it all, and it's now no longer this always changing kind of sinusoidal, let's say, wave of some sort where you know you don't know what's going to happen. And I mean, and there's
right.
you know
What's a better hike to go on a piece of asphalt in New Mexico that is 100 miles straight, flat, and everything's the same, or taking a walk up through the Rocky Mountains, on
right,
paths and one is
right,
much more challenging and interesting and fun, and the other is just okay. It's the same. There's nothing. Doesn't even
which
get your
is
heart rate up. So
which is interesting you point that out, because like to go back to the financial literacy people or the financial professors, it's like don't invest
right,
in anything that's crazy or fun. Just stick to this boring stuff. Like stay with
right.
boring stuff your entire life. It's like, then why the
Well,
fuck am I even living? Like why am I living if I'm just going to do
well,
everything that's
that's right.
boring? Like what the fuck type of reality is
I
that?
know. Well, it's not only that. It's like it's all about like meeting the norm, like what
Yeah,
everybody's decided the norm is. So like to have the norm, to have the retirement nest egg, you got to do it this way, and that
sure.
works,
That's
and
true.
it's like, well, yeah, I mean the other way of doing it is taking a 9 to 5 job and working 60 years and retiring,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But at the end of that 60 years, I was like, what did I do? Did I experience anything in my life? Probably not. I mean, whereas you go out and start a business or you do a profession or you build things or you become an electrician, you can talk about the achievements you made, the things you've built, what you've created with your hands. I mean, again, it's back to that journey. The journey is the value. I think
Right.
the money is maybe the reward or some of the um, end result so you can enjoy your retirement. I don't know. I mean, but
Yeah,
I still go
but again,
back
what's
to,
retirement? What do you mean enjoy your
yeah,
retirement?
yeah,
Like
yeah, I know you're right.
shouldn't you be enjoying the process?
Yeah. Well, I still haven't fully converted to this new mindset.
Yeah,
So I'm still stuck in that
yeah,
retirement
conditioning
shit.
is still there.
It's hard
That's
to
crazy,
break. So,
but that's so crazy.
yeah,
I mean, I'm kind of
yeah,
glad you made that mistake. Like it
I know.
highlights in this episode like how it's just so ingrained. It's like
It is.
you keep
It
going down
is.
the same rut. I mean, I also
Yeah,
really like your analogy of like, do you want this just stable slope of, what if
yeah,
every single day you got like 0.02%? I mean, there's those options. Those options exist in the
right,
finance world where you can literally just guarantee
right,
1%. And then you hear the argument,
right,
oh, well, like that's not fast enough. You're never going to get rich off that. It's like, okay, so what? I should be an
right.
inconsistent 3%. And hey, diversify. End of the day, 100%
Yeah,
diversify. I'm no financial advisor. None of this is financial advice, full disclosure,
right,
but
right.
just, it's like I think it is like and here's where I kind of sit on it, and maybe this is a good transition, is I think that there's value to what these financial professors and, Warren Buffett and all these, let's say, finance people who say, no, just do the simple stuff. I think there's value to it. I think that you should be putting some of your money into those stable things where if you do need it for whatever reason, you can just sell it and you have it. But at the end of the day, that's like the only way you're going to get rich off that is if you're consistently doing that day over day over day over day over day, putting in the same amount of money every single day. And it's like, hey, again, there's more than one ways to get rich. There's more one ways to make money. If that's what you want to do, by all means. I know people who are completely content living a comfortable, steady stream life. But I don't think that's for everybody. And I think that's probably something that we miss as a society, is that it's like, well, what's right for you might not be right for me. What's right for me might not be right for you.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, everybody has a path in life, and you can't impose what you think is best on someone else. The only thing that matters to them is what's best for them and what they feel is best for them. And you can support that, you can engage with it. And for ourselves, we have to find our own journey, and everybody has a different type of journey. They're not all the same by any means. So just realizing that most people do have a journey or a passion or a desire. Whether they're executing it or living on it or doing it is another thing,
Right.
But it's kind of crazy. It's kind of crazy out there.
Well, I mean, but that's a good point, is like whether or not they're executing on it. It's like, like that's a huge thing for me, is and maybe this is a good way to wrap it up or summarize, is like, that's what I'm hoping to kind of put out with all this. It's like, all this stuff that has been said through all these episodes, this is now the 5th episode. It's like, some of this might not be for you. Like, I'm not, some of this is like just a small subsection of the population. I mean, obviously I'm talking to my dad, so apple doesn't fall far from the tree.
Right. Yeah.
So, a part of this is just like what I'm interpreting the world as, and just take from it whatever you want to take from it. Don't take it as gospel.
Right. Yeah. I think we have to find our own happiness through what we want. It's somebody shouldn't be telling you what will make you happy,
right?
Because how would they know? I mean, we don't even know sometimes what we need to make ourselves happy. So
how does someone else know?
Yeah, exactly. It's so I like what I've learned from you in a few weeks you were home. In terms of the positive thinking and the meditation and relaxation and stuff. Really put me in a much more peaceful mindset. I'm finding it easier to talk to people I wouldn't normally have a conversation with, so
I love it.
It's really kind of fascinating.
Are we able to, let's talk about that for a little bit? Cause I think that's huge information in my opinion. Do you want to intro, do you want to go into more detail?
Sure. Well, I'll tell you an experience right before this. I was down at the Villa Real Pizza. And I've been going there for years, and Fran, who's a waitress there, all these years I thought she was a waitress. Well, here she's the owner. I never knew that. And she's a real nice person, and so we really kind of got into a conversation today because they've been having trouble. They've been open throughout the pandemic. Business has been off. It was their father's business, and she kind of runs it. Her brother's supposed to help her, but he doesn't help a lot. And so she feels like she's got a lot of weight on her shoulders, and everything that comes out of her mouth is negative. And I said, did you tell your people that we're open? I said, well, yeah. I said, but not everybody's coming back yet. I said, because of the COVID. And she's saying smart. I said, Fran, you need to be positive. Stop saying all that negative stuff. I said, what do you mean? I said, well, you're being negative. I said, sure, well, and she just had this whole, and I said, look, you need to smile every day. She's very religious and she believes in God. And I said, and so we started talking for a while and just getting into the idea of having a positive mindset. She said, well, every time I leave here, the business comes. So maybe I should just leave. And I'm like, Fran, maybe it's your negativity that's leaving. It's not you. I said, and so we got talking. Wow. She's laughing. She's like, yeah, you're right. So and it was like about 12:30 and there still was nobody in the restaurant, 12:20 or 11, or was it 12:20? I forget what time it was. It was like 11:20. And So I said, so she started smiling. She's like, yeah, you're right. I said, yeah, let's put everything in a pot. I said, look, you have this business, got a lot from that business all these years. She said, yeah, yeah, I was able to. And so she started getting this positive mindset. And all of a sudden, all these people started coming into the restaurant.
Really?
And before I left, like 12 people came in. She said, look, two more, two more. I said, see, Fran, I said, you just need to have that positive
Oh
mindset.
my
People want to
gosh.
come to positive energy. And she's like, and she's just like beside herself. She's like, oh, thanks. I mean, like I've never had this deep a conversation with somebody that, stood on the other side of the counter from me. It's always been pleasantries and hello, but
But
we
this is
really got this.
all of this happened today.
Yeah,
Like this was all
today,
just
yeah,
in one
within a half hour,
conversation.
one conversation, and it was like, and I found out all about her and her marital situation and stuff. I mean, she's a really good person, but she says, she said, we didn't do well in high school, and we got this business, but it's not what I want, And I said, well, are you trying to sell it? She's like, yeah. I said, well, maybe that's the path you need to go on. If it's this hard and you don't like it, I said,
Right.
but don't be negative about it because it did a lot for you, didn't you? She said, yeah, well, yeah. She said, I had a roof over my head. She said, I said, think of all the positive things, and then the guy behind the guy cooking back there, he starts saying, yeah, I had 6 relatives die in the last 15 years. Come on, kids commit suicide and all this like
Jeez.
horrible stuff. He's there, but I still positive every day. He's there. I got to, you move on, you got to stay positive. I'm like, yeah. And so all this positive energy was, and then all these people started coming into the restaurant. It was the most bizarre thing. I mean, it wasn't even lunchtime yet, And
Yeah.
I'm like, and then I'm walking up by Fran. I said, there's 4 more over here that came in the back. And she comes running out. So it was just hysterical, so
Oh,
she's assured me she's going to try to say things positively and think positively from now on.
but
I'm
I
like,
mean,
oh, I
that's,
said, yeah,
but see, this is the ripple effect that
I
I always
know.
tell you about. It's
Right,
like,
right.
you
Yeah.
know, and
3 weeks
so,
ago, I'd never had that conversation with her. Never.
right.
I mean, it would have never even occurred to me.
So in your words, in your words, so I'm not, not, I feel like this is going to come across as me embellishing myself, but what happened with you in
Yeah.
the last 3 weeks?
Well, we've had a lot of discussion about positive thinking and being present, mentally in conversation as well as about myself and meditating on the things that are important that I want to change in myself. And I think it's been very helpful. I mean, it's really, I find myself every facet of my life is a little bit slower and a little bit more in control. Everything from driving to eating to how I respond in meetings and stuff. So, I mean, I'm not there by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm so much further ahead already. And I had a conversation with a woman out on the street the other day. I mean, she was somebody somebody living on the street. She's asking me about my tennis shoes, and so we started having a conversation. She said, well, where'd you get? I said, well, you have to order them online. She said, oh, yeah. I said, yeah, they're these Konas. I said, they're great. I said, I got bad knees and blah, blah, blah. She said, well, you can get those at Street Fleet or Fleet Street or something like that. I'm like, really? I said, they sell these in the store. She's like, yeah. And so we talked for like 5, 10 minutes. She said, well, I got to go. She walks away. She's carrying her, strolling bags with her. And I'm thinking, wow, I had this conversation with a person who in the past I might not even wanted to stop and talk to because they're just somebody living on the street. But, so I feel like maybe it made her day and it made my day at the
Yeah.
same time to have this impromptu conversation that, you know, was just friendly. It wasn't, and it was about, the tennis shoes I was wearing.
You learn something. She,
Yeah.
feels a little bit more validated. Cause I always feel so
Yeah.
bad. I mean, when you see people like on the side of the road and it does that
Yeah.
cascade effect where it's like, if you're sitting there kind of panhandling and people are like, no, like not even giving you eye contact. I mean, it reinforces
Yeah.
in your mind that you're not important. It reinforces that you
Right.
don't
Yeah,
exist.
you're right.
And
Yeah,
it's
you're right.
so, it
You're right.
makes it such a difficult kind of situation,
Yeah. It does. It does. It really does. So,
but it's,
yeah. So I think, that's that ripple effect of time. It's one conversation or one person at a time, and
yeah,
it's gratifying. It's and I feel more thoughtful about what I'm doing every day.
I'm so happy to
So
hear
it's
that.
good. Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm very thankful for that. I mean, it was a great experience. So, and
that's
it's
awesome.
something I'm still working on.
Hey, it's about the journey.
So it is. It's about the journey. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean,
So
to that, I mean, that's probably a big part of it. We, after 2 weeks of working on this, like I was like,
hmm
I'm struggling with this, help me out a little bit, and so,
yeah.
I, and I remember there was a point where we were, this would have been a little bit more than 3 weeks ago, but I kind of was going on this journey, I think. And, you made a comment along the lines of, oh, we were talking about the free range eggs. Like,
Ah.
oh yeah, free range eggs and and they're more nutritional because of this. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. You're like, yeah, see, I could still teach you something. And I was like, did I ever say you couldn't?
Well, that's probably me exposing an insecurity.
Exactly. Yeah. but I the reason I bring it up is it's like, to go full circle with all of this, it's like we can all learn something from somebody else, and everybody, no matter what age, knows something that we don't, can help us in a certain way, can see something in a different light. And it's really just, it's up to you, whether it's you or the person listening, or these people listening. It's up to the individual to take away from each interaction what they want to take away from it. And a huge element of that is being present. And if you're not present, then you're not going to be listening at all. So there's nothing for you almost.
Exactly.
Oh, cool. Do you have any closing remark? I think this was awesome. This was a great podcast.
It was a great conversation. I love you, Clayton. Proud of you.
Love you.
I'm anxious to hear more about your journey as you move forward into seeing the rest of your friends, your sister, Brazil, all that's pretty exciting.
Yeah.
So let us know when we come visit you in Brazil. I need to get Mom down to Brazil.
Yeah, for sure.
Maybe we should do it when you're in the Amazon jungle. That would really test her.
First baby steps. Remember baby steps.
Baby steps. Yeah.
You can't just jump at the head first.
Okay, Porto Alegre first.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah. But I love you, Dad.
Mom, I love you too, son. Take care.
Yeah. So just for everyone else still listening, thank you for making it through all this. Thank you, Dad, for taking, 2 hours out of your busy day. I hope you guys got something from this. If not, again, like always, if we said something that pisses you off, I'm happy to talk about it. Just relax and meditate beforehand. Don't come at it with anger, always choose love over anger kind of thing. I mean, at the end of the day, I think this was an awesome conversation. I appreciate my dad for coming on. StrataLLC.com. Get all your, if you live in Pittsburgh, Raleigh, or Philly, go look them up. They've got some pretty nice buildings, and there might be some technology stuff in the future, but I'm not gonna with them. But we're not gonna talk about that. That's for a little teaser, maybe. But other than that, without further ado, thanks you guys. That's gonna wrap up episode 005. And as always, let's remember to grow together.
Great.